Okay, everyone, thank you for attending today's optional Zoom meeting. I do appreciate your time. We'll have about 30 minutes to discuss whatever it is that you would like to discuss. I'm hoping it's the upcoming paper. The rough draft will be due next week and the final draft the week after that. A few things that I like to begin each of our Zoom sessions with, especially since this really is our first one meeting together. Make sure that you are on mute by default, just so that way we can avoid any background noise. I do prefer that you have your camera on, but I don't require that. Okay, I understand that things are different right now, that they've been different for about a year, close to it. And so we might be more or less comfortable with video wherever we're at. So while I would like your cameras on, because it's always good to get biofeedback to kind of see your faces and to see how you're responding to the things that I'm saying, it's also, I'm not going to require that. All right, whatever your comfort level is with it. The next thing I want to say, if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. If you notice that I'm lecturing about something, or maybe another student has an extended question, okay? So that way you don't forget your question. And also I get caught up in the moment and I can go back and I can I can check the chat as well. I like to call the chat the parking lot. You just park your questions there. So feel free to, normally we'll just have, popcorn style, we'll just move around and answer questions. But if you're concerned about your question not getting answered or forgetting your question, you can type it into the chat. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and begin our little review session. So it's been a few weeks, but we're in week 4 now, right? The first gauntlet has been thrown down for you. We have our essay number 1 rough draft due next Tuesday. And you'll notice from the prompt that we'll begin with the rough draft on Tuesday. Then you'll have a few days to complete a peer review. And I'll explain more of that for next week. After that, the week after, at the end of week 6, that's when the final draft of essay 1 is due. So questions that you have about essay 1 or about any of the writing lessons that I have instructed or I've shared with you so far? Let's see, how many students do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We got 10 students. Okay, got to be a question here somewhere. Well, the first thing that I want to make sure is that you've all seen the essay prompt. So please give me a thumbs up in the reactions, or you can pop in and say, yes, you have. But I want to know that you all know there is an essay due and that you have had access to it, to the prompt at least. Okay. A few getting some more here. Okay, good. All right. Well, I hope you also understand that you have an option in terms of what to write about. Okay, of course, this class is practicing critical thinking through the lens of gender. So regardless of which film you choose, you're going to have to study the gender message or messages that you see presented in the film. All right. So make sure that regardless of which film you choose, whether it's Ex Machina, which is free on Kanopy, or it is Django Unchained, which it used to be available on Netflix, and then I think their contract ended, and I have it on Amazon Prime. I'm sure you can see segments of it on YouTube too, but that's the other film, right? You do have to look at gender in terms of both of them. Why don't I share my screen and we can look at the prompt together, because there is a question that I put on the prompt I would like you all to pay attention to. So this week's focus, the writing focus for this week, was constructing a problem, right? I appreciate having, oh, thank you. I'm reading the chat right now. Stella, I did not realize it was still on Netflix. So for those of you that have a Netflix subscription, Adrian, which one do you have? What are you holding up there? Can you unmute yourself, please?
It's also on Netflix, yeah.
What is it? What is also on that? Oh, you're letting me know that
Yeah.
Django is perfect. Excellent. That's good. All right. I do hope that most of you have Netflix. And then that way you've got two options, one that you're already paying for, and then you've got Canopy for Ex Machina. A couple of notes here. You know, I know Tarantino films are extremely violent. There is a method behind the madness. I'm not sure how familiar you are with some of Quentin Tarantino's movies. My first experience was watching Kill Bill when I was in college. I loved the movie, extremely violent movie, but there is an art behind the violence. And you could actually combine that with your study of gender too. Depends on how you track things, right? If you're attending to who is performing the violence, who is experiencing the violence, right? So you could take something that might be a source of discomfort and then analyze it, right? Turning it into an object of study. With Ex Machina, it's a film that I saw several years ago. I loved it when I saw it because I thought it was provocative. It is definitely not violent in the way that Quentin Tarantino's movie is. So that's why I wanted there to be another option just in case there was some concern about it. Okay, so let's pull up the prompt, and I want to make sure that my screen continues to share at the same rate. So if for some reason I'm talking about something that you cannot see, please let me know. All right, these are some of the things that I mentioned before. The rough draft is due next week. The peer review will be due at the end of next week. For you to participate in the peer review, you're going to need to turn your rough draft in on time, okay? That would be the way to guarantee that you would get your, well, I should say increase your chances, that you would have your rough draft reviewed by a classmate and that you would be able to see what your classmate has written, okay? I strongly advise participating in the peer review. It's not graded, so it will not hurt you in any way, but it does give you some insight on, well, how are your classmates looking at these same films that you're trying to look at, right? How are they reading things? And you get some feedback from them too. If you would like feedback on your rough draft, not the whole thing, but certain elements of it, let me know, okay? I will take a look at it with you. We can set up a meeting, or I can just take some time to look at a few of the elements of argument that we have talked about so far, specifically the quality of your claims and the support. While I'm speaking about elements of argument and your rough drafts coming up, I encourage you to take a stab at constructing a problem and a response, okay? If you haven't made it through the lecture material for this week, those are two elements that make up your introductions, okay? When we do research, we need to do research that matters, okay? We can't just study things that, oh, I'm interested in this, okay? And so that's where having problem-based research helps us deal with why does something matter. And when we say a problem, we're thinking in terms of how have we taken an idea that most people think and then started to expose how this idea is limited in some way, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean like, you know, a personal problem that you have or something you are irritated by, although it could, okay? You can merge those two things together. But when I say problem, I'm saying you've identified the common way of viewing things. That's the context portion of the introduction. And you're seeing how limited that way of viewing things is, okay? And you're also explaining, well, why would it matter to view things differently or to explore this research question that you have? And so that's why I wanted to review the prompt with you, because you might be stuck with this, especially if this is your first time looking at research as problem-based, okay? So we have two basic kinds of problems when we're doing research. They're practical problems, which have practical solutions, right? How do we apply, how do we fix certain things, right? So like a practical problem might be traffic in the city of Los Angeles, right? How do we reduce traffic? Okay, well, a practical solution might be increasing funding for public transportation, right? improving infrastructure for cyclists, right? So there are more bike lanes so people don't rely on cars so much. Or more appropriate to what we're experiencing right now, increasing online remote functioning, right? So that way people don't have to get in their cars and drive, right? So those are practical solutions. Conceptual solutions, or sorry, conceptual problems are more with how we think, okay? And those things can be related to each other, conceptual problems and practical problems. Really, the way that you think of, excuse me, the way you think of a problem in probably, well, likely leads to the solution that you suggest, okay? So if you're someone who is more in favor of public transportation, then and you kind of think that's your way, well, then you're going to suggest putting more money into public transportation. But if you're someone who's all about independence and owning a vehicle, you're probably going to be like, well, expand the freeway system, okay, or fix our freeways a little bit more. So depending on how you think, what your values are, what your training is, that's going to shape the way you see a problem. That's going to shape the way you propose a solution. Now, this class, because of my training, right, my background is in literary studies, and that's much more interdisciplinary now than it was maybe 30 or 40 years ago, probably like 50 years ago. So we do more cultural studies now in literary training, okay? At least it's been that way for me. So we are doing oftentimes more conceptual problems. How do we think about certain things, right? What does it mean when we define literature in a certain way? And certainly there can be practical issues that result from that. But as far as conceptions go, we have to think to ourselves, we have a different set of questions. In this class, we're focusing on the conception of gender and sexuality. How do we understand these aspects of our identities? Okay. The first three readings by Lorber, Schwartz, and Hill Collins dealt with different aspects, dealt with certain assumptions that we might have made about gender and sexuality, right? One assumption might have been, if you're born with certain sex traits, then you will necessarily display certain gender traits, right? That there's this fusion, or what I believe Schwartz calls the confabulation of gender and sexuality, okay? Well, if this is, if separating those two things, sex and gender, from each other is new, okay, then what the common understanding was, if you have these sex traits, then you will act this way, right? And that idea then disrupted it, right? The idea that, we would separate gender from sexuality. Gender is cultural. Sorry, I don't want to say sexuality, sex, which is biological. We would separate it, right? Gender is cultural. It's what you do. It's how you perform it, right? And sex is biological, right? The anatomical traits, your biology, right? Well, that's pretty radical, okay? But that's only because we have conceptual problems that we have entertained, right? Now, we are practicing this in film, okay? We are going to look at how gender and sexuality are performed in front of us. And I've chosen Django Unchained, primarily Django, because it was a film that received an Academy Award nomination. It was a box office success. So to me, those are two indicators of how widely consumed this film was. It made a ton of money, right? And it was critically reviewed, or it was positively reviewed, okay? So even people who maybe perceive themselves as separate from the popular world would have appreciated this film in some way, right? There was some indicator there. So when we study popular culture, which is what we are doing in this class, we want to be attentive to what are the things that tons of people care about, right? Because people feel connected to these things in some ways. They identify with these things in some ways, okay? Even if it's a strong rejection, right? There's still some attachment there that is worth exploring, right? Why is this being approved of? Why is this being accepted so well? Why is this being rejected? So that's why I've chosen a film like Django Unchained. Ex Machina is also a widely positively reviewed film. It definitely did not make the money. I should double check on that. I actually shouldn't speak about it. I don't believe it made the same amount of money that Django did. I don't think it was quite the box office success that Django was. Nonetheless, though, it's a worthwhile film. It's what, 2014, so now we're talking 6-7 years old, and Canopy thinks it's worth putting on their streaming service, right? So clearly of some significance and relevance to us even today. The fact that Netflix still has Django Unchained, a film that is now 8 years old, right? That's also an indicator of its continued popularity and success. So that means these things still resonate with us for reasons. And that's what I want you to explore, right? Those reasons, though, you're going to be looking at are the gendered ones, right? So I want you to think about this question if you're having trouble formulating your own conceptual problem, right? Does the film reinforce conventional views of gender, or does it resist them? How so? Be specific. All right. There are a few ways to be specific here, okay? Let's focus on this term here, gender. You are not looking at all gender identities in this film. We're not looking at all conceptions of masculinity and femininity, okay? But instead, I want you to identify, okay, at the very least, I would encourage you to look at either masculinity or femininity, okay? And we would then revise the question that way. Does the film reinforce conventional views of masculinity? Okay. Does the film reinforce conventional views of femininity? Right. Or we've got another question, the resistance one, right? Does the film resist conventional views of masculinity? Does the film resist conventional views of femininity? Okay. To back up and to go to the term convention here, this week I posted a voice thread. Normally I'll add a lot more audio commentary to the voice thread, but I wanted to just get the content out there to you. But the voice thread that I'm speaking about was the one titled Gender Norms. I basically listed the different norms that Pepper Schwartz and Patricia Hill Collins discuss in their articles, okay? Now I want to be clear, Schwartz and Hill Collins and Lorber too, they're not saying they agree with these norms. They're not saying they live by them. They're saying their research has shown these tend to be cultural rules, okay? That they can find evidence that people follow, right? And that there are repercussions for when people don't follow, okay? We'll talk about those repercussions later in the semester, like what do we look for? How do we identify that? Nonetheless, so when I say convention, I'm talking about rules. I'm talking about norms, right? Right. Men are supposed to wear pants, right? Women are supposed to wear dresses, right? You know, that's a much older norm, okay? But that would be an example of a norm, okay? Hill Collins and Schwartz have much more complex norms that they have cataloged in their articles. So I do not list all of Lorber's in there. I only got to Schwartz and Hill Collins, but Lorber discusses gender norms too, okay? So what I would say, there's two ways you can approach this. There's more than two, but I'm thinking of two right now. Watch the films, right? And pay attention to the stuff that strikes you as strange, outstanding, or significant, okay? Either because you're like, oh man, that's so cool, which is probably a sign of connection, right? You're connecting with something if you think it was pretty rad or pretty cool, okay? Or maybe disgust or repulsion, right? If you feel some form of disgust or repulsion, then probably something is happening that is breaking with convention as you've experienced it, which is breaking with norms, right? So I would suggest track your feelings as you're watching this film. What seems appropriate, what seems amazing and excellent, right? What do you connect with? And what are things that you disconnect with, okay? That may seem repulsive or disgusting. And as you are describing, because then the next level would be then to describe objectively what it is that you are seeing. And that's what we practiced last week in the discussion board about the movie posters, right? Visual rhetoric, we've got these images that convey arguments to us, right? Well, we can't really see what those messages are, what those arguments are, until we first identify the details that we are seeing, okay, that are in front of us. So you list your details and then you move to the process of interpretation. So start with your gut, right? What moves you one way or another, okay? What moves you in a positive way emotionally, what moves you in a negative way emotionally. And then from that process, the next step in that process, as I see it, is you start to report objectively the details that you are seeing in those particular scenes that move you one way or another, okay? The other way you can go about doing it is pick out a gender convention and then look for it in the film, okay? How does the film perform this particular gender convention about the way men are supposed to be or the way women are supposed to be, okay? See how many different examples of that particular gender norm you can find, okay? Where does the film seem to be on it? Does the film seem to reinforce this conventional view? Or does the film seem to resist it and criticize it in some way, okay? So that would be the way that I would encourage you to use this question here. One, make it more specific. What gender identity will you be looking at, okay? At the very least, pick either masculinity or femininity, okay? You can go much more complex than that, okay? As Hill Collins shows us in last week's reading, right, there's a hierarchy. There are masculinities, right? We have hegemonic masculinity at the top, and then we have subordinate and marginalized masculinities underneath, okay? And the ethnic and sexual identifiers that we have in our society probably put you in certain groups too, right? Marginal, subordinate, okay, possibly even hegemonic too. So, and the same goes for femininity. Just as there's a hegemonic masculinity, there's hegemonic femininity, and there are subordinate femininities, and there are marginal femininities too, okay? So you can make this as specific as you want. There is no shortage of material in Django Unchained and Ex Machina, okay? I recently rewatched Ex Machina. By the way, how many of you are thinking of going with Django right now? Give me a thumbs up if you're thinking of going with Django. 1, 2, 3. Okay. For the others, 4. All right. For the others, are you thinking of Ex Machina? Or give me a thumbs up if you're thinking of Ex Machina. Okay. Seems like about half or so. All right. Great. The toughest thing to do with a paper is to get started. Okay, so if you're uncertain, just jump in. All right, you've got to do this, right? If you want to grade in the class, you've got to do it. Of course, you can always choose not to, but we're not going to have we don't have an infinite amount of time. Okay, and I guess I will finish up here with the late policy and the redo policy. You are always welcome to turn in something late within reason. And by that, I mean, I need to clarify with you all when the end of late period number 1 will be, okay? I cannot have the late period carry on through the whole semester because it's possible that someone could not do anything until the very end. And in a worst case scenario, it's possible everyone doesn't do anything until the very end, okay? And I am not capable of grading. What would that be? Something like, if there's about 25 of you times 3, that'd be like 75 papers, right? So I'm not capable of grading all of those papers at the end of the semester within like a week of submission. Also, you probably would not like the grades you would get on those papers, okay? And you also wouldn't have any opportunities for redoing, okay? So I want to remind you all of my policies. I have a late policy. You can turn things in late. Last semester, I gave everyone like the end of the first late submission was about a week or 2 after the second essay, okay? So you definitely have half the semester to get in this first paper, okay? I will send an announcement to clarify that, okay? We have 2 late periods in this class. One is around the middle of the semester that it will end, and then the other is at the very end of the semester. As far as redos go, those are limited to the late period too. You've got to get redos in within the time period that the paper was assigned. So you can't turn in essay one at the very end, like your first submission at the very end of the late period, and then expect an opportunity to redo it. Okay. It's best that if you're planning on redoing essay one, that you turn it in on time, right? Friday of week 6, or within like a few days of it, because usually it takes me about 2 weeks to get papers back to you, and you want to have time to review the grade and see whether you would like to set up a meeting in order to complete a redo. All right. So that's a quick reminder about the late policy and the redo. I'm happy to remind you of that again, especially if I made things confusing here. So any questions at all regarding any of the material that I've covered?
I think there's a question in the chat.
In the chat? Okay. Thank you for letting me know about that. I lost track of the chat. Let's see. Okay. Are we allowed to use, this is the question from the chat, are we allowed to use other sources besides the film and our class readings? Let's see what the prompt says. What did I put in here? At least one scholarly source from among the recent class readings. Well, this is what I would say. While you are allowed to do that, that's the short answer. Short answer is yes, you are allowed to, okay? Let me tell you why I would encourage you to stick to the film in one of our class readings, okay? Given the amount of time that we have, right, to find an article that is appropriate is a challenge. For lots of reasons that we will discuss in greater detail when we move into that stage of the semester, especially with the research paper. The problem I've seen in papers that do this in the past is that they rely too much on the scholarly sources, the secondary sources, right? For the first essay that we work together on, I really need to see how you analyze things, okay? I really need to see how you interpret the primary source, which would be the film, okay? When it comes to the scholarly source, I do need to see it present in the in your essay. I would say, why don't I post a bit more information on how to effectively incorporate a scholarly source into your essay, okay? I do have a voice thread I created for another class. It was a literature class, but we dealt with this same kind of issue. There are 3 places that I encourage you to put a scholarly source in your paper. You know, you could use the scholarly source in your intro to help you set up your problem. You can use it in the body of the paper as a, maybe you want to respond to a critic in like a topic sentence claim, right? Either expressing agreement or maybe refuting, objecting to what they say, identifying maybe what they've overlooked. And then the last part would be in a support sandwich. You could incorporate a scholarly source into one of the support sandwiches for your paragraphs. Remember, you need 2 support sandwiches, all right, for each paragraph that you're writing. By the way, if you write a paper with 2 support sandwiches per paragraph and all of your topic sentences are debatable, you've got all the elements for your introduction, you're going to get a B or better, okay? So please follow those guidelines, all right? You will meet my standards at the very least, right? Yeah, getting in that B range. So yes, you are allowed to use other sources. I don't encourage it. I think you have enough material to work with with regards to the film and one of the scholarly sources that I've assigned to you, all right? Great question, Eric. Thank you for asking that. Other questions?
I have a question about the structure of the essay, Professor.
Yes, let me find you. Who's speaking right now?
Edgar?
Edgar, okay, great. Thank you, Edgar. Go ahead.
So for the quotes, you want us to insert the ones from the books, like from Lorber and Schwartz, and the commentary, you want us to talk about the movie?
Yeah, so, in the support sandwich, you can, I would prefer that the majority of the quotes you incorporate into your paper are from the movie, okay? You can have some support sandwiches with scholarly source material. I think one of the most effective strategies I've seen is when a student has the basis for their support sandwiches being the quotes from the film, and then every now and then they incorporated a quote or an idea from a scholarly source in their analysis of the quoted material from the film. Okay, so like if we were to quantify it, okay, don't hold me to this exactly, but what I want to say is that you know at least 50 to 75% of the quotes should be from your film, right? We value primary sources because that is you, the researcher, connecting directly with the material, okay? That there is no mediation in between, all right? Scholarly sources, while they are very credible, we don't want them to do the work for us. So definitely do not have, like if you imagine, let's see, 2 support sandwiches per paragraph for a 5-page paper, you're looking at about 4 to 5 paragraphs. Okay, to be safe, I think you should all plan for 5 body paragraphs. Okay, it's always easier to cut something out. All right, so let's say you do the safest thing, you plan for 5 paragraphs. You're looking at 10 quotes, all right, total for those 5 body paragraphs at 2 support sandwiches, right? You should have no less than 5 quotes from the film, okay? 50% at the very least, all right? I would encourage you to spend most of your energy, the majority of it, on the quotes from the film, okay? So think more like 50 to 70%, okay? 50 to 75%, all right? Something like in that range, all right? So while the scholarly source should be present in the paper, it should not dominate, okay? Because then the scholar's voice is taking over, right? I need to see you take a stand on things. I need to see you back up the claims that you make, all right? Edgar, does that answer your question?
Yes, I have a follow-up question
Yeah,
too.
please.
So for the voice thread that you gave us, each paragraph should be about one of the gender norms?
No, now that is going to vary depending on the argument that you're trying to make. Okay, you could do this whole paper based on one norm. Okay, depending on the norm that you choose. Okay, let me move to show you all just in case you're not sure what I'm speaking about. All right, so let's go. I apologize for whatever background noise. We have 3 kids at home. They're all under 7. Let's see here. Is my screen tracking? Can you see the modules page?
Yes.
Thumbs up, good?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. All right, so I posted a couple of voice threads. This one is about context. I don't know, I didn't post that one for you all yet. You guys have the one about crafting a thesis. Here's the one I was talking about with the gender norms. It's called Some Norms of Gender and Sexuality. Should be. All right. Let's see what the first one would be. All right, so here we have the social construction of heterosexuality. That's the title of the article by Pepper Schwartz. Okay, let's say, here we go. Here we go. What if we said this one here? In order to be considered heterosexual, individuals are presumed to be singularly and unproblematically aroused by the opposite sex and the opposite sex only. Okay. You could write a paper, okay, examining one of these 2 films, focusing on the tension, especially if there is any homoerotic moments in the story, right? And then you would start to kind of explore how these homosocial, homoerotic, depends on which one you want to go for, all right, are being represented here. How do they challenge, okay, the masculinity or femininity of a particular character, right? At least how they challenge those particular views. So depending on how interested in one of these norms you are, right, how well you understand it, right? You could do one norm for the whole paper and explore how the film deals with this idea, okay? I do not suggest that you list a bunch of norms, right? Because what we don't want is a list, we want an argument, right? So what I would say, Edgar, is focus on constructing the problem, okay? Coming up with the critical question that you want to answer in your paper. You propose a response to it, that would be your thesis. And that thesis is what you use to figure out, okay, the norms here that you want to use that are useful or not. All right, I would not necessarily suggest having a new norm for each paragraph, okay?
I see what you mean. So like take a stand on one of the norms.
Yeah, I think that might be the easiest way, right? So yeah, without writing a paper for everyone right now, I have a particular scene, several scenes in mind from Django, and from Ex Machina too, that apply to this particular one. But you know what? We can look at all of these and find these in the films, okay? They play with all of these norms, right? And they're not necessarily coming out to do this, okay? Sometimes films do these things explicitly, like they want to prove, yeah, women are strong, right? And I don't mean in that ironic representation to undermine that women are strong, but sometimes there are some films that do that unproblematically. Anyway, I don't want to get into that too much. Nonetheless, like I think a film that does it really well that I have thought about assigning to you all is In a World. That's an excellent movie. And In a World takes I'll talk about that another time. We're running out of time here. It's an excellent movie about how important it is to, it's an important movie about the female voice. Okay, and it takes the metaphor and it extends it in the performance of voice actors. So really good movie. I think it was on Netflix for a little bit, but also went away. And again, I was wrong about Django. Maybe it's still there. Okay, other questions? I'm going over time, but I'm happy to do it. I'll go just 5 more minutes. That's the max that I can do here.
You answered all mine. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks, Edgar. And if you guys come up with other questions after our meeting today, later on in the week, just email me. Okay, I'll try to get back to you as quickly as I can. Especially now, right? We don't have our face-to-face classes. We can't see each other casually on campus. So I've really made it a priority to respond to emails as fast as I possibly can. All right, I do check a couple of times a day. And if you don't hear from me within 24 hours, don't take it personally. Just email me again. Okay, you can just forward the email. It's okay. It's really important that we connect with each other as frequently as we can. Any other questions? I'm going to check the chat just in case I missed anything. Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, everyone, thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing from you in the days to come. And if not that, then I look forward to checking out your rough drafts and seeing how your ideas are progressing. If that being said, we'll end the meeting there. Good luck to you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
Bye, Professor.
Bye-bye. Take care.